All right, we ready to rock? Okay, so we're going to continue on with the with lesson 10, the Battle in the Pacific. We talked about the Leapfrog island hopping campaign, bit of a joint operation. It was really Nimitz who pushed for it, coupled with General Douglas MacArthur, who was in charge of the U.S. Army forces in the Pacific, wanting to take smaller islands that were not as heavily fortified. In this particular situation, U.S. Marines are going to launch amphibious invasion on the atoll at Tarawa, which was located in the Gilbert Islands. This is just before Thanksgiving, 1943, November 20th to 23rd. The group that launches this invasion, it's a joint Marine Corps and naval operation. The landing craft tract will take members of the 2nd Marine Corps Division ashore at the atoll known as Tarawa. They're going to land on the beach of Basio. This is the most defensively, or up to this point, these are the heaviest defenses that Marines had encountered in an amphibious assault. Certainly it will not, it's going to get worse as they get closer to Japan. The Japanese are going to be heavily dug in. What the Marines did have intelligence, but the intelligence that they did not have is that these were volunteer Japanese soldiers of the Kwantung. Why might that group have been a little bit more difficult to fight? They're volunteers, meaning that I need y'all to hang in here with me, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Because they chose to do that rather than, like, guess what? You're fighting for us now.
Yeah, so if they volunteered, the Japanese probably did what? Yeah, you said training. Their training was on an elite level, okay? So they are some of the most well-trained members of the Imperial Japanese Army. Not to mention, many of them had been veterans that had served in engagements prior to America's entry into World War II. Yes?
Were they incentivized?
Monetarily, probably, but it's more about the honor and the distinction. And then obviously there would have been other incentives like possible land grants, women, things of that nature, which is like hard to stomach, but that was part of the deal in the Imperial Japanese Army. All right, so we have about 4,500 Japanese defenders, well supplied, well prepared, veteran, volunteer forces. They fought nearly to the last man. This was exacting a heavy toll on the U.S. Marine Corps 2nd Division. In fact, on Basio, after an entire day of fighting, several things went wrong. Number one, the landing craft tract required the tides to be out to be able to land appropriately. So, how many people have ever gone to the beach and read a tidal chart? Anybody ever done that? Okay. So, if you ever go to the beach, you do any, like maybe fishing or you want to, next time you guys go to the beach, check out a tidal chart. Whether it's on an app on a phone or you just pick one up. The tidal charts are almost accurate to the minute, right? But in this particular situation, there was a slack tide. So the tide never really went out. For 5 hours, the tide stayed in place. So when they landed, they thought they were going to land at Basio, this little strip of the island on the atoll, do you understand what atoll? It's like a series of islands with a lagoon in the middle, right? So they thought they were going to land no problem, and the track vehicles were going to hit the beach, but instead they're receiving heavy fire, and they're having to dump these Marines out, and a lot of the Marines never even made it on the beach. Some of them drowned in 15 to 7 feet of water where the landing craft thought they were supposed to land, and dropped their doors, and there's no land. They're still in the water. So that was a really devastating problem for the Marines here at Tarawa. Again, the U.S. had suffered similar casualties in other campaigns, like Guadal, which the 2nd Marines and the 1st Marines had previously fought in, but not in this short of a period of time. So for that entire day, they fought at Baisio, and into the night, they were crammed at Baisio, basically shoulder to shoulder. Imagine like the area in which we're sitting, or I'm standing and you're sitting. They're like crammed together. No shots fired, no flashlights, no matches, no nothing. And they kept having to deal with these Japanese soldiers sneaking in with knives, trying to cut them in the middle of the night. And they're having to kill these Japanese soldiers with their bare hands and with their knives, not to fire up a shot, because they're fearful that if they fire up a shot and the Japanese know their position on Baisio, they're just going to send in an air raid and take out all of those Marines. So it's a bit of a miracle that the 2nd Division did not get wiped out that night on Baisio. So the next day, this is where Norman T. Hatch comes into play. Bless you. Hatch and a group of Marines, Hatch with a group of Marines, are going to storm defensive positions, and he gets all of this on film. This is the first film in which it serves a number of different purposes. Number one, no one had seen what the fighting in the Pacific looked like with their own eyes, because everybody in Europe and some people at home are like, oh yeah, the guys down in the Pacific, sun and fun, good times had by all. Not the case, all right? We already know what the fighting was like at Guadal, and it's similar. We're talking hand-to-hand combat, Japanese soldiers who are willing to commit hara-kiri, suicide, following the Bushido Code rather than surrendering. And Hatch gets all of this on film. The next thing that it does, it provides the Marine Corps with a great deal of intelligence as to what these island invasions are going to look like moving forward in the island hopping campaign. And then the third thing, it gives Hatch the opportunity to produce propaganda film that will end up winning an Academy Award for short documentary. So nearly 6,000 Japanese and Americans died on this tiny island in just 76 hours. Marines in the 2nd Division fought with great valor. As I said, Norman T. Hatch films the battle, and the documentary is entitled With the Marines at Tarawa. And again, it's one of the only films that really contains some gruesome scenes of American combat early on. And as I mentioned before, the film goes on to win an Academy Award in 1944. Not Best Picture, but again, short documentary. Here's Norman Hatch on the left. I don't think that's on yours. I just added this one. Up top, this is the atoll of Tarawa, and this is where they originally land at Baisio. And then think they've got to take this entire atoll. And then here are Marines on Red Beach at Tarawa. The 2nd Marine Corps Division carrying the torch. This is the same constellation, the Southern Cross, that is on the 1st Marine Corps Division. Do you know what the Southern, did I mention this before? What the Southern Cross represents? Constellations?
Southern Cross, that's the constellation that helps you find south.
Yeah. It's representative of Guadalcanal. So that's why the 1st and 2nd Marines have that on their insignia. And this is a difficult picture. This is just some of the bodies of the 2nd Marines on the beaches of Tarawa. They did their best to get every Marine out of there and back. Some of them ended up, they were buried on beaches, but that's sort of part of the Marine Corps way, never leave a soldier behind. So they always tried to bring back their dead. In fact, one of the more gruesome accounts in, I believe it's chapter 6 or maybe 7, I think it's 6, The Hard Way Back, which is about Guadal. A Marine talks about how they had to go back and get the bodies from these shallow graves. So like they'd bury them in shallow graves and they'd come back to get them back home. And he said it was like the most difficult job because you try to get guys that were like in different divisions, like 1st Division guys would try to go find 2nd Division guys and vice versa, and how horrible it was because the bodies started decomposing so fast and on these islands and in the jungle. But he talked about how one guy found his brother. They were in different divisions. He found his brother's body, which it's hard to, like, sends chills down your back to think about that. But yeah, they brought back as many guys. Has anybody ever read Unbroken before? Seen it? Or I don't think they just deal with it briefly in the film, but in the book they really just, like, they probably spend close to a half a chapter talking about it, and then they come back to it later in the book. But the first island that Louis Zamperini was taken to was a prisoner of war camp, and there were 12 Marine names that were carved on the door in that camp, and they could never find their bodies. And then later in the book it talks about the Marines trying to go back later to find those 12 Marines who had been in that Pacific camp that Louis Zamperini had been in. This isn't the one where they made him like run the race and like carry the railroad tie. This is like the original one where he had like been his life raft was found by Imperial Japanese Navy. So yeah, Marines were always trying to go back to find their missing, killed, and wounded. I mean, so was the Army and the Navy, but the Marines took it to sort of a different level. Yeah. All right, so this is where I just wanted us to take a look. I'm sorry I moved the map on you, but I thought this would be a good place to take a look where we've been. We've talked about Pearl Harbor, we've talked about Midway, we've talked about Coral Sea. And so what this line is in reference to is essentially the island hopping campaign moving forward closer to Japan. So where we're going to move when we get to Japan a little bit later, or the Pacific campaign rather, as we get closer to Japan, is going to be the island hopping into the Philippines, into the Marianas, toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And if you were wondering where Tarawa was, if you take a look right here, these are the Gilberts. So the Gilberts, the Solomons, Guadal, this whole area right here, that is going to be secured by the end of 43, moving into 44 in the Pacific. So the reason I feel like Tarawa is a good place to stop is it is at the end of 43, and then we can in the next lesson, we'll just move into 44. That sound good? Do you guys have any questions here? All right, excellent.